Hey everyone. I was looking at some research about this protein CD80, and I gotta say it's pretty amazing. It's like this small thing, but it has such a big effect on how our bodies fight off things, especially
Right.
cancer. It's like the volume knob, I think, for our T cells, all those warrior cells in our immune system. But the really interesting part is that CD80 can actually activate A and D, suppress our immune response. It's like this weird duality, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today.
Yeah, it's really a balancing act. That's what makes it so important.
Absolutely. And to help us break it all down, we have an expert here with us. The article we're diving into today is called CD80, Amplifying Immune Activation Through Co-Stimulatory Pathways from Assay Genie. They're a really great resource for science stuff. So are you ready to dive into this CD80 world?
Yeah, let's do it. So CD80 is a protein, and it's found on the surface of certain cells. These cells are like the scouts of your immune system. We're talking about dendritic cells, B cells, and macrophages.
Oh, okay. So these scout cells, they have CD80, and
Hmm.
they're talking to my T cells, right? The soldiers of the immune system.
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. CD80 can actually bind to two different receptors on those T cells, and these receptors work like switches. They control what the T cell does.
So like an on switch and an off
You
switch.
got it. The on switch is called CD28. When CD80 connects with CD28, it's like giving those T cells a big energy boost. It tells them to multiply and make cytokines. It's like they go into attack mode against whatever threat they found.
Wow. So it's like an alarm that sends those T cells right into battle.
That's a great way to put it. Now, the other receptor, that off switch, is called CTLA4. When CD80 binds to this one, it's like hitting the brakes on the T cells, telling them to calm down.
Right, that makes sense. You don't want your immune system just attacking everything. It needs to be controlled.
Exactly. This balance between being active and suppressed is super important for a healthy immune system. It makes sure your body can fight off infections and diseases, but without hurting itself. It's like a car. You need both the gas pedal and the brakes to drive safely.
I'm with you so far. But I have a feeling this is where things get a bit tricky, right? What happens when cancer gets involved?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, cancer cells are pretty smart. They've found ways to use the immune system to their advantage. And one way they do this is by messing with CD80.
Wait, so cancer cells can actually change CD80. How does that work?
Some tumor cells actually make more CD80.
Hmm. I would think that would mean a stronger immune response.
It seems that way, right? But it's not that simple.
So they're tricking the system.
Yeah. By increasing CD80, these cancer cells are actually pushing things toward that inhibitory signal, the one from CTLA4. They're basically turning up the volume on the off switch, making it harder for your T cells to attack.
Hold on, so they're turning up the volume on the off switch.
Yeah,
That's not fair. They're using my immune system against me.
that's exactly what they're doing. It's like they're taking your immune system hostage.
That's scary. But there have to be a way to fight back. We can't just let them win.
Don't worry, there is hope. Scientists are working on new therapies that can outsmart these cancer cells. One way is by targeting CD80. What if we could block CD80 from binding to CTLA4? It would be like cutting the wires on that off switch.
So basically taking the brakes off the immune system and letting the T cells attack with full force.
Precisely. And that's where monoclonal antibodies like 1610A1 come in. These are basically proteins made in a lab. They're designed to target CD80 and stop it from binding to CTLA4.
So 1610A1 is like a shield protecting the on switch.
That's a great way to think about it. And the exciting thing is, when you block that CD80 CTLA4 interaction, 1610A1 unleashes the power of your T cells. They can actually target and eliminate cancer cells. Researchers have even seen tumors shrink and, in some cases, completely disappear after treatment with these drugs.
Wow, that's amazing. So 1610A1 is like giving your T cells a superhero upgrade.
You got it. But like any powerful tool, there are potential downsides. We have to remember the immune system is really complex, and changing it can have some unexpected results.
You're talking about side effects, right?
Right? When you boost the immune system, you make it stronger, but it can also overreact and attack healthy tissues.
So it's a balancing act, trying to boost the immune response enough to fight the cancer, but not too much.
Exactly. That's why careful dosing, patient monitoring, and ongoing research are so important when developing these therapies. But even with these challenges, the progress being made in immunotherapy is pretty remarkable.
I have to say this is all fascinating, but it's a lot to take in. Could we just pause for a second and recap what we've learned so far about CD80?
Absolutely. So we've learned that CD80 is like a volume knob for your immune system. It controls how active those T cells are, those powerful cells that fight off infections and cancer. We also learned that CD80 has two sides. It can activate T cells, telling them to attack, but it can also suppress them, telling them to stand down. And unfortunately, cancer cells have figured out how to use this to their advantage.
Right, they hijack the off switch, stopping our T cells from doing their job. But the good news is that scientists are developing new therapies, like 1610A1, that can block this signal and unleash the full power of the immune system.
Exactly. And this is just the beginning when it comes to the potential of immunotherapy.
I'm hooked. Can't wait to hear more.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about how cancer cells use CD80 to basically stop our immune system. But I'm curious, how does our immune system even know these threats are there in the first place?
Well, it's kind of like a dance with a lot of different parts working together. Remember those scout cells we talked about?
Yeah.
They play a big part in all of this.
You mean the dendritic cells, the B cells, and the macrophages?
That's right. They're like the intelligence agents of your immune system. They're constantly checking your body for anything that looks suspicious. And when they find something that doesn't belong, like a virus or bacteria or even a cancer cell, they capture it and break it down.
So like they're taking mug shots of the bad guys.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And then they do something amazing. They take pieces of that invader, those are called antigens, and they show them off on their surface. They use these special molecules called MHC molecules.
The MHC molecules, I've heard of that before.
Yeah.
Isn't that what they look at for organ transplants? You're exactly right. MHC molecules are different for everyone. That's why organ transplants can be so tricky. The body has to make sure those MHC molecules on the donor organ are a good match. But when we're talking about the immune response, these MHC molecules are like billboards. They show these wanted posters of the enemy so the T cells can see them.
Oh, okay. So it's like the scout cells are saying, hey, T cells, look what I found. This doesn't belong here.
Exactly. They're presenting those captured antigens to the T cells. Like, this is the enemy. We need to get rid of it.
And this is where CD80 comes back into play.
Exactly. Remember, those T cells need a second signal to make sure they should attack. That second signal comes from CD80 on those scout cells. When a T cell sees an antigen presented by an MHC molecule, it also needs that handshake from CD80 to really get activated.
So the scout cell shows the T cell the mugshot, and then CD80 gives the order to go arrest the bad guy.
I love that analogy. And remember, whether CD80 binds to the on-switch CD28 or the off-switch CTLA4 on the T cell, that's what decides if the T cell attacks or holds back.
Okay. I think I'm starting to see how all of this works. But we were talking about how cancer cells can actually manipulate this whole system. How do they do that?
Well, like we said before, some tumor cells make more CD80, but they're not trying to help your immune system. They're trying to trick it.
I'm still a little confused. Wouldn't more CD80 mean more T cell activation?
It does seem that way, right? But by making so much CD80, those tumor cells are actually increasing the chance that CD80 will bind to that off-switch CTLA4 on the T cells. It's like they're trying to sabotage the immune response by overloading it with stop signals.
So they're taking over the brakes and stopping the immune system from attacking them. They're so sneaky.
They are.
Yeah.
And it gets even worse. Some tumors release other molecules that suppress the T cells even more. It's like they create this protective bubble around themselves where the immune system can't even reach them.
Like they're building a fortress.
Uh-huh.
So what can we do about it? You mentioned those therapies like 1610A1 that target CD80. How do those work?
Usually these therapies are given through an IV, so they're injected right into the bloodstream.
So those antibodies travel through the body, and eventually they reach the tumor and the immune cells around it.
Exactly. And when they get there, they bind to CD80 and stop it from interacting with CTLA4 on those T cells. This lets CD80 bind to CD28, the on switch, and that tells the T cells to attack.
So it's like they're cutting the wires on those hijacked brakes and giving the immune system back control.
That's a great way to describe it. And researchers are seeing some really cool results with these therapies. Sometimes the tumors shrink a lot, and in some patients they even completely disappear.
Wow, that's amazing. So is there hope that these therapies could cure cancer?
It's definitely possible, but we have to be realistic. Not everyone responds to these therapies in the same way. Some people see big improvements while others don't see as much. And there's always the risk of side effects like we talked about earlier.
Right, finding that balance between boosting the immune response and keeping it under control. But it's still incredible that we can now manipulate the immune system so precisely.
It really is a revolution. And it all comes from understanding how our immune system works, including these fascinating molecules like CD80.
I'm really glad we did this deep dive into the world of CD80. It's clear that this tiny protein is a big deal in how our immune system works. And understanding it is really important for making new and better treatments for diseases like cancer.
I completely agree. It's a very exciting time to be working in this field.
Before we move on, let's just quickly go over the key points about CD80 again for our listeners. It's a lot of information, so I want to make sure we highlight the most important things.
That's a good idea. So to recap, CD80 is super important for how our immune system responds to threats, including cancer. It's a co-stimulatory molecule, which means it gives a second signal that helps those T cells activate and attack.
It's like that final confirmation the T cell needs to make sure it's attacking the right target.
Exactly. And this co-stimulatory signal happens when CD80 interacts with two receptors on the T cells, CD28, the on switch, and CTLA4, the off switch.
Yeah.
The balance between these two signals is really important for controlling the immune response and making sure it doesn't go too far.
It's all about maintaining that delicate balance.
Mm.
But we also learned that cancer cells can take advantage of this system. They increase how much CD80 they make, and that shifts the balance towards that inhibitory signal.
Basically, they're putting the brakes on the immune response.
Yes, exactly. They create this environment around the tumor that suppresses the immune system, making it harder for the immune system to attack.
Those sneaky cancer cells. But luckily, scientists have developed those monoclonal antibodies like 1610A1 that target CD80, and they block it from interacting with CTLA4.
Precisely. When you block this pathway, these therapies release those brakes on the immune system, and that lets the T cells recognize and destroy those tumor cells. And even though there are still challenges, especially with managing side effects, the early results of these CD80 targeting therapies are really promising. They give us hope for better and more personalized cancer treatments in the future.
Absolutely. The future of immunotherapy is bright, and all this research into how the immune system works, including the role of molecules like CD80, it's all leading to some amazing advances in how we treat cancer.
This has been such a fascinating look into the world of CD80 and the immune system. I feel like I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners have too. Welcome back to our deep dive on CD80. I'm still kind of blown away by all this stuff about this tiny protein and how it can help us fight cancer. It really makes you think about how complex our bodies are, especially our immune system.
Yeah, it is amazing how far we've come with immunotherapy. It's like we're figuring out how to control our bodies in a whole new way.
I know, right? It feels like we're really close to something huge. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I want to make sure we've covered everything for our listeners. We've been talking a lot about CD80 and cancer, but are there other uses for this research? Could targeting CD80 help with other diseases too?
That's a great question, and researchers are definitely looking into that. The cool thing about understanding these immune checkpoints is that we can use them to adjust the immune response in different ways.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, think about autoimmune diseases where the immune system attacks the body's own tissues. In those cases, we might actually want to lower the immune response, not boost it.
So instead of blocking that off switch like we do with cancer, we might want to make it stronger.
Exactly. If we can find a way to activate CTLA4, that off switch, we might be able to calm down the immune system. And that could stop it from causing more damage in autoimmune diseases.
Wow. So the same ideas we use to fight cancer could help with all sorts of other problems.
It's pretty exciting. And it's not just about CD80. There are a bunch of other immune checkpoints that researchers are studying. Each one has its own special role in controlling the immune response.
I've been hearing a lot about PD-1 and CTLA4 in the news. Are those similar to CD80?
They are. They're all part of this big network of immune checkpoints. PD-1, for example, is another inhibitory receptor on T cells like CTLA4. But instead of binding to CD80, it binds to a molecule called PDL1.
So it's like a different lock and key, but it has a similar effect on the immune system.
Exactly. And you know what? Tumor cells often have a lot of PDL1. It's another sneaky way they suppress the immune system.
Those sneaky cancer cells.
Ugh.
So are there therapies that target PD-1 too?
Definitely.
Yeah.
There are actually several FDA-approved monoclonal antibodies that block PD-1. They stop it from interacting with PDL1, and that takes the brakes off the immune system.
It sounds like we're building a whole set of tools to change the immune system.
Mm.
But I imagine there are still challenges and risks, right?
Of course. Like we've been talking about, the immune system is really complex, and messing with it is always a delicate balance. There's still a lot of research to do to really understand these immune checkpoints and figure out how to target them safely and effectively.
That makes sense.
Mm.
But it's clear that we're moving in the right direction. Immunotherapy has so much potential, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Me too. It's a really exciting field, and it's changing so quickly. I think we're going to see some amazing breakthroughs in the next few years.
This has been an amazing journey into the world of CD80 and the immune system. I learned so much today, and I hope everyone listening has too. I want to thank our expert for being here and explaining all of this to us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And don't forget to check out Assay Genie if you want to learn more about CD80 and the immune system. They have a ton of great information on their website. That's all for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.